Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
This is part 4 of our Long Island serial killer case coverage. He left her this creepy voicemail. And that sounds awfully familiar to those creepy phone calls that Melissa Barthelomew's family received shortly after her disappearance.
That's creepy.
Yeah, that creeps me out just thinking about that. Do you think that he killed all 10 of them, or was he just the one that killed the Gilgo 4 and somebody else killed the other ones?
Just think of how depraved and monstrous this one guy was. If he did kill those 10, plus who knows how many more. The first one was killed in 97, so that's, that was 26 years between that murder and when he was arrested. So the path to justice has begun, I guess. So we'll see where it takes us and where this all ends up. Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my two sisters, Stephanie and Katie. And this is part 4 of our Long Island serial killer case coverage deep dive. If you haven't listened to parts 1 through 3, go take a listen, because we covered a lot in this case, including the discovery of the bodies, what led to the discovery of the bodies, all about the disappearances of the women that they found, and all of that stuff, and police corruption. So a lot that we've covered in this deep dive. So go take a listen to parts 1 through 3, because in this part, we are going to be talking mostly about the arrest of the suspect in this case, what led the police to, have him on their radar, what led to his arrest, and kind of all of the outcomes or where we are now in the case. So that's what we're going to be going over. This is our final episode of not only this part of this case, but it's also our final episode of the season, and it's our 100th episode. So we're very excited to have hit that milestone. It's
Woohoo!
Woo! Yeah, 100 episodes. Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about it. In some ways, it feels like we've done that, but in other ways, it feels like we haven't done 100. So
It doesn't. It feels like way more, I think.
Oh, you think it feels like more?
Yeah, when you said 100, I'm like, no, there has to be more than that.
No, for me, it feels like we haven't done 100. Even though it's been a lot of work, I just feel like that's I can't even think of all the names for the 100 of them that we did. So it's yeah, it's crazy.
It's a lot, yeah. And it's 100 hours, maybe an hour on average each episode, or a little less. So it's 100 hours of us talking about true crime.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's a lot.
Go us.
Yeah, so it's exciting. If you are a listener from the beginning, we thank you so much for being with us for 100 episodes in. If you just kind of recently joined us, we're happy to have you now. And so thank you so much. And 100 episodes. We hope to make the 100th one a good one. So I'm going to kind of just get right into it. So where we left off the last time was when the police finally got their shit together and they arrested a suspect. On July 13th, 2023, 59-year-old Rex Heuermann was arrested in connection with the murders of the Gilgo 4. So he was originally charged with just 3 of the murders, which was Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. But he was considered the lead suspect in the murder of the 4th woman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. But later on, in January of 2024, he was eventually charged with her murder as well. So currently he is charged with the 4 murders, even though there's was a total of 10 bodies found, or 11 bodies if you include Shannan Gilbert. So still unsure if more charges will be coming, but the Gilgo 4 is what he has been charged with. So Something that was interesting was in the police documents and in my research of this case, discovered that Rex was actually charged with first-degree and second-degree murder in the killings. So this is something that stuck out to me. I've never really heard of someone being charged with first and second-degree murder for the same murders. I feel like a murder is either first-degree, like premeditated, or second-degree, which was not premeditated. I feel like it's either one or the other. So it seems sort of counterintuitive that you would be charged with both. So initially when he was charged, there were 6 charges because he was charged with the first 3 murders, but those 2 counts for each one. So it was the 6 charges. And I have in my notes here, like I'm going to look more into what would cause someone to be charged with both of these simultaneously, but I actually haven't been able to find a clear answer. I literally typed that into Google. Can you be charged with both of those simultaneously? I looked at like other articles on this case to see if it would be mentioned, the court documents, and nothing really came up that I could find. So I was just very confused as to why he would be charged with both of those. Like, to me, that's weird. Do you guys have any thoughts or insight, maybe?
I think this has come up before in other cases that I've either just come across or looked into. And yeah, it surprises me that you're able to do that. You think you have to pick just one, but obviously I think the reason is just so like if one of them doesn't stick, then they have another one to fall back on. So if they don't think it was first degree, then okay, well then it's second degree and they can at least have one of those stick. But it does seem weird that it could be both for the same person, like for the same victim.
But doesn't that sort of like weaken your case? It's like, it kind of shows like you're not sure or you don't feel confident that you have enough for first degree. So you're going to have that second degree one there just in case. Like to me, it kind of weakens the argument. It shows that there's some type of doubt.
Yeah, it might put doubt as if in like it was planned or not planned. But I think the whole thing is we know for sure that he murdered them. We just don't know at this time if it was, premeditated or not. So I don't know. I don't think it weakens that he was the murderer. It maybe just weakens like their, I guess, like the motive part or the planning part of it.
I guess. And I guess maybe we could argue, I mean, to me, it's like maybe the first one is not premeditated, but after when you get to the fourth one or even more, I feel like it's probably premeditated at that point. But what do I know, I guess? So Rex Heuermann pleaded not guilty to all charges and even broke down in tears at his first hearing, declaring his innocence. But authorities believe that they have the evidence to prove his guilt and to paint a picture of exactly the type of person that Rex really is, which is a, quote, warped demon or animal who preyed on his victims, was obsessed with police efforts to catch him, and was at risk of striking again, end quote. And that quote comes from The Independent, who reported that. So who is Rex Heuermann and what led the police to his doorstep? So there were kind of a series of things that sort of made them focus in on him. So Rex Heuermann was born in 1964 in Massapequa Park on Long Island. Rex graduated high school in 1981, and then in 1990 he got married to his first wife. They eventually divorced, and then Rex got remarried years later. I believe they got remarried in 1996. So Rex was an architect and eventually went on to have his own firm, RH Consultants and Associates, which he founded in 1994. The main office he worked out of was located in Midtown Manhattan, and his adult daughter actually worked at the firm at the time of his arrest in 2023. So from the outside, it seemed like he had a perfect suburban life with his own business in New York City, living happily married with his second wife and his children. However, all wasn't what it seemed to be. Rex was also quite litigious. In the span of only 8 years, from 2014 to 2022, he actually filed several lawsuits against people that he claimed hit him with their cars. And there were also several tax liens against his house, and he was about $400,000 in debt and paid back only about half of that by the time 2022 came around. So at the time of his arrest, Rex lived in his childhood home in Massapequa Park. And about a week after he was arrested, his second wife, Asa Ellerup, filed for divorce. However, she doesn't believe that Rex is capable of the crimes that he's being charged with. And ABC News has reported that she is giving him the benefit of the doubt and she visits him weekly. So according to ABC News, she has stated, quote, "I will listen to all the evidence and withhold judgment until the end of the trial," end quote. So, I mean, it seems like she's doing the right thing. She's not jumping to any wild conclusions, and she's waiting to see all the evidence that's presented before she officially makes up her mind. So while she doesn't believe Rex is capable of these crimes, she's at least open to hearing the evidence. So she isn't saying, like, absolutely no way. She's keeping an open mind based on what she's saying. She has expressed her condolences to the victims' families, even though she's withholding judgment from her ex-husband, their accused killer. So court records reveal that his second wife, so Asa Ellerup, she was actually away and out of state at the time that the Gilgo murders took place. Police were able to confirm through passport records that she was in Iceland from July 8th to August 18th, 2009, which is when Melissa Barthelemy was killed. And then from June 4th to 8th, she was out of state. She was visiting Maryland. And this is the window of time that Megan Waterman was killed. And then from August 28th to September 5th, she was in New Jersey, which is the window of time when Amber Costello was killed. So it seems from these three instances, at least, that there is a pattern of killings whenever his wife is out of town for any length of time. So it was also confirmed that his wife and children were out of town during the time that the first victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, disappeared in July 2007. And so CNN reports that having his wife and children out of state gave him, quote, unfettered time to execute his plans for each victim without any fear that his family would uncover or learn of his involvement in these crimes, end quote. And then in another quote, they say, quote, this indictment again makes clear that Asa Ellerup and her children were not involved or even in the jurisdiction when these murders took place, end quote. And that was a quote by Asa Ellerup's attorney, Robert Macedonio. So like I said, so the police believe that, she wasn't involved, which is going to kind of come into play a little bit later when I go into the details, but they've pretty much cleared, her or her children from any involvement. And it seems obvious that he would commit these murders when they were away for a significant amount of time. So that all lines up. So Rex married Asa Ellerup in 1996, and they lived a quiet suburban life. He had his daughter, I believe, from his first marriage, and then she had a son. So he lived with Asa, his daughter, and then his stepson. Rex's neighbors have described the home that he lived in Massapequa Park as a dump with overgrown shrubs and lots of junk in the front yard. His neighbors did not have the greatest view of him either, as they never really got along with him or liked him very much during the entire time they were neighbors. However, CNN did report that others have said that the family pretty much kept to themselves. In his professional life, his colleagues would describe him as creepy or arrogant, and The Independent reports that one woman who was a part of the same networking group of architects in the city, I don't know if it was a group chat or something, but she recalled him having called and left her a, quote, creepy, end quote, voicemail on her phone, even though they never worked together directly. So they were just in sort of the same circles. They probably worked for separate firms, but were just kind of in the same network. And even though they weren't co-workers, he left her this creepy voicemail. And that sounds awfully familiar to those creepy phone calls that Melissa Barthelemy's family received shortly after her disappearance. Now, remember, I think it was in part 1, we mentioned that after she went missing, her family started to get messages from, or voicemails and calls from a burner phone of a guy who was just super creepy and admitted that he killed her and all of this stuff. So, if he did in fact kill her, he's also has a habit of doing this, he calls this woman and leaves her a creepy voicemail. So the woman actually came forward, and The Independent reports her saying, quote, he left this voicemail for me end of February after I left the group. Previous to that, he did call me a couple of times. I answered the phone, nothing really significant. I found it odd he was calling me because I had no work for him. There's no ongoing relationship. We were just two people who used to be in the same networking group. There's nothing incredibly scary about the voicemail besides the fact that he is the Gilgo Beach murderer, end quote. So, I guess she's kind of saying there that it wasn't super creepy, but maybe just in retrospect. I guess it was creepy that he was calling her, but not that he didn't say anything that was a red flag. But now in retrospect, it's creepy that he was the accused killer. So one of the major factors that ties Rex Heuermann to the murders is the fact that the police were able to track the burner phones that were used to contact the Gilgo 4 victims to Rex's Midtown Manhattan office. And further, phone activity from the victims' burner phones show that the phones pinged in the Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan areas several times in the days before and after the Gilgo 4 victims went missing, including the taunting calls made from the burner phone to call Melissa Barthelemy's family in the months following her disappearance. So that kind of all lines up, and the court documents actually go into detailed summary of, the dates that the phone is pinging, near Midtown Manhattan, which is where his office was, and in Massapequa Park where he lived. So there's a lot of phone activity that traces, these burner phones to those two locations quite regularly. And so I'm going to read a portion of the court documents that I'm going to read them word for word from the court documents because I think they give the best description of how the police were able to track the burner phones to Rex directly. And instead of just summarizing it in my own words, I just wanted to read it directly from the documents here. American Express records obtained via subpoena revealed recurring Google Pay payments made by defendant Heuermann to Tinder, an online dating and geosocial networking application used to find dates or hookups within a user's immediate vicinity. Records were then obtained from Tinder, which revealed that the Tinder profile was set up in the name Andy, and Heuermann's middle name is Andrew, with links to a burner cell phone, and then they give the number, subscribed in the fictitious name of Andrew Roberts, using an email account, springfieldman9@aol.com. So the springfieldman9@aol.com account was established with AOL on January 15th, 2011, in the fictitious name John Springfield, with an Astoria, Queens, New York zip code, using another burner cell phone. And then they give the number of that cell phone, which records show has no named subscriber. Records obtained from Verizon showed that defendant Heuermann's cell phone was used on December 11th, 2022, for a period of over 3 hours to access the fictitious Springfield 9 AOL account. Similarly, records obtained from T-Mobile show that burner cell phone with the phone number was used on multiple dates, including November 8th, 2022, to access this account. So that's one thing that tied him to it was that he accessed this account. They know that he was the one who accessed these fake accounts. And these fake accounts were used for soliciting sex workers. So investigators were given a search warrant for the Springfield Man 9 at AOL.com account, and they were able to find selfies that appear to be of Rex and used to solicit sexual activity from prostitutes and escorts. So after police arrested Rex, they recovered 2 burner phones from the home raid that they conducted the day after his arrest. Along with the discovery of the phones, police also found between 200 and 300 guns on the property, which were stashed in a vault obscured by a metal door. Police also uncovered fraudulent email accounts that Rex had set up using aliases and searches for online torture porn. Electronics searches also uncovered that Rex had conducted nearly 200 online searches for information about the murder investigations and even information about the victims' families, as well as photos of them and their families. So clearly, he's very invested in the status of the investigation. He's very invested in the murders of these 4 women. And he was smart enough not to use his own personal email or his work email or anything like that, but they're able to show that he accessed the fake accounts that were then used to make those searches and then to solicit the sex workers and all of that sort of stuff.
Can you imagine how much time and memory it takes to get all those email addresses and all those phone numbers and keep track of them? Like who you called and all that? Like that just seems like a lot of work. We also know that like most serial killers, well, not most, well maybe some serial killers, they do like to keep up with the latest news too because they want to make sure that like they're covering their tracks, right? So it's not out of the ordinary for him to have, like, you said news clippings and stuff of the investigation, right?
Yeah, can you imagine how stressful it would be to, you did something wrong and you're just like waiting to see how close the police are to catch you. So yeah, I can definitely understand why he'd be following the news and stuff.
Yeah. And so the police, it's pretty compelling evidence against him that he's, doing these searches and he's creating all these fake accounts and he can be tied to these burner phones. And so
also, I just want to mention, like, the amount of guns, like, 300 guns, like, that is a shit ton of guns to have. And also, when I was doing my research, like, how I was saying they were looking into hunters, but they didn't look at gun licenses. Apparently, he had 97 registered guns to his name. And so, if the police would have looked into that, I feel like 97 registered guns would have definitely stood out. And then, obviously, as we know, he had way more than just what he had registered. So, that was, like, another little piece that if the police would have just looked into, they could have, his name could have popped up a little bit sooner. But yeah, that's just like a crazy other little detail.
Yeah, it's crazy. And who needs that many guns? I mean, who needs, any guns, first of all, but especially 200 to 300. Like, it's wild.
I know, that's nuts. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, and you did say, like, I think in the last episode that, like, none of the victims were shot or there was no evidence that they had been shot. So it's like,
I was just gonna say that, like, why have all those guns if your victims that you've killed weren't shot? Like, what's the point of having those guns then? Just to make yourself look better?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what he was doing with them, just a collector, or maybe, I don't.
But who needs 97 registered guns?
Also, it should just be a red flag, first of all. Like,
I was just going to say, yeah, wouldn't the system, like, flag that? Like, this person has 97 guns that are registered. Like, that seems a bit obsessive.
yeah.
Excessive.
Like a single, like, running your name through a database should flag how many registrations you've had. And that should be just an instant red flag, I would say. Nobody needs that many guns, for sure. Further investigation revealed that the burner phones could be linked to online activity and the creation and use of a junk email address. So this email was thawk080672@gmail.com. So the burner phones that he had in his possession that were taken in the home raid, those were the phones that were used to create this fake email address. And the records from Google show that the account was registered under the fake name of Thomas Hawk and was used to conduct, quote, thousands of searches related to sex workers, sadistic, torture-related pornography, and child pornography, end quote. Also, the phone was used to do searches on several serial killers and the 4 Gilgo Beach victims and the investigations into the murders. So he was tracking the progress of this investigation, was specifically looking for the victims' names and how their investigations into their murders were going. Just some of these searches that are listed in the official court documents. So I'm not going to list all of them that were listed, but just some of them to give you an idea. These are like word for word searches. So one of them is, why would law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Long Island serial killer phone call, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, the Gilgo Beach killer, Criminal Minds. In Long Island serial killer investigation, new phone technology may be key to break-in case. So those are just like examples of like what he was searching. So clearly he's in possession of these phones that did searches that show he's very invested in the progress of this case. So not looking good for him, for sure. The email account also searched for several podcasts and documentaries that covered the Long Island serial killer case. So he was probably listening to true crime podcasts that did episodes on the case, and
That's creepy.
Yeah, that creeps me out just thinking about that.
I was just thinking, like, if we would have done this, like, back when we were talking about it, like, he could have been listening to our podcast about this case.
yeah.
That gives me goosebumps, actually. That's really creepy.
Yeah, because we were going to do this case like a while ago. It was like early on, like the podcast is one of the first ones we were going to do, and then we just didn't. But it's crazy if we had done it. Like, he could have been listening to our podcast. Just, I don't know. And also, I don't know why he was looking up the podcast. Like, was he just trying to relive, like, just some kind of like a memory or a trophy of like that he did it? He wanted the notoriety, or
Maybe he got a joy out of
Yeah.
reliving. Yeah, like,
or he just was interested, curious about what people were saying about him. It's just creepy. Consistently looking into the updates in the case and just really invested in what people are saying about the case. So one thing that actually came out in the court documents after Rex's arrest was something that I just wanted to like kind of throw in there, but it was something that transpired on the days before the 4th Gilgo 4 victim, Amber Costello, went missing. And so it was just like a part of the documents about her disappearance that I just felt was interesting. So the court documents read that one of Amber's clients, who is alleged to be Rex Heuermann, showed up at her house in West Babylon, New York, where Amber and a man proceeded to play a ruse on him. So after he showed up to the home, Amber's acquaintance pretended to be her outraged boyfriend, which scared the client and caused him to return to his vehicle and leave the home. In this process, while the client was distracted by the screaming boyfriend, Amber obtained the money that he had brought to pay for her services. So a witness claims that the client said something along the lines of just being a friend of Amber's and, quote, tell her I'll give her a call, end quote. Then at 1:18 a.m. on September 2nd, which was shortly after the ruse had been conducted, the client texted Amber's phone and said, quote, that was not nice to do. Credit for next time, end quote. The police have determined that the phone sending that text message was located in Massapequa Park, within 2 minutes of the message being sent. And of course, Massapequa Park is where Rex Heuermann resided at the time. So then around 9:32 p.m. on that same day, September 2nd, the client had contacted Amber again saying he wanted to see her, and she had relayed to friends that he did not want to come to her home because of what happened with her boyfriend the day prior. The burner phone used by this client was located in Midtown Manhattan, and then Massapequa Park, and then to West Babylon where Amber lived. Amber then left her phone behind and walked out her front door and was seen alive for the last time. And there was a description kind of in that whole thing where he showed up at her house where they got the description of this man who looked like an ogre who was 6'4" or something like that. So that's kind of when that happened. But just interesting that he was persistent with Amber. I don't know if he was like just infatuated with her, because like you'd think after that happened and they like tried to scam him out of his money that he would leave and not want to have anything to do with her. But he persisted and kept messaging her and wanted to meet up with her the next day.
That's something that I was just going to say too. It was almost like he was fixated on her and he was her target, so he wasn't going to stop until he got her, kind of thing. Because like, yeah, you'd think after people actually saw him that he would never want to show his face literally there again. But he did, because he was so determined to get her. Like, it's creepy that he like was kind of like, yep, I'm going to get her no matter what. Yeah.
And I think because even in part 1 when we talked about her disappearance, that it was mentioned that the person who had killed Amber, or the client that she had gone to see, was very persistent and was like pursuing her over multiple days. So that was something that did come up. And so it's just interesting. Yeah, he was very determined. Or maybe he was like pissed after like she tried to scam him, and like that's when he decided like, okay, I'm going to meet up with her and I'm going to kill her to get back at her for doing this or something. Like, who knows if that's what made him decide. I mean, given his pattern, it's likely he would have killed her anyway, but that certainly didn't deter him anymore.
Honestly, though, it's kind of like his persistence was part of his downfall, because if he didn't show up again, if they didn't know that it was the same person, then the witnesses might not have been like, they identified his vehicle and things like that, because if they thought there's just some random guy that didn't ever come back, then they maybe wouldn't have connected the two things, right? So they wouldn't have been like, yeah, he drove this car, because they would have thought it was just somebody else. So it's kind of like his persistence was one of the things that got him caught in the end.
And yeah, I guess like it was when he showed up for that time when they tried to scam him, like maybe that's when they got the car description or the description of the vehicle.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. But like, if he never came back, then they would have thought that it was somebody different that killed her, right? Like if he wasn't trying to get her again, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't think he actually showed up to pick her up at her house. I think she like walked a little bit and he met her somewhere else.
I guess, but did they know it was the same person though?
Oh yeah, I guess they did, because I think she had said.
Yeah, like if he had never showed back up there, they would have never connected. Obviously, he wouldn't have killed her, but they also wouldn't have connected the two. You know what I mean? Because it was like, oh, this guy that was driving this Chevy Avalanche, we scammed him, but he never came back. Or she never talked to him again.
Oh, yeah, true.
So it never would have been connected. You know what I mean? Like he could have just left there.
Yeah.
If he would have just left it alone, they would have never have got that description to the police, basically.
Yeah, that's true. And they would have assumed that like this person's not going to show his face again. So if he hadn't, the fact that he was driving that car would have been irrelevant. Like, okay, that was the car of this person we tried to scam was driving, but it's unlikely that he's going to like persist and still contact her and then go on to kill her. Yeah. So.
Yeah, or he could have pretended to be somebody else and they would have never have known that the person driving that car is the same person, right? So they never would have told the police that.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, they never would have had the description of the vehicle of the murderer because they wouldn't have known it was the same person.
Yeah, that's true. So like his persistence in the situation, is kind of ultimately his downfall, because that car tip ended up being very important. It's one of the things I think they knew that the person who had seen her had driven that car, and like they knew that he was registered as having driven that car. So it really ended up being his downfall, and that like day that he showed up at her house ended up being like a very pivotal sequence of events. Obviously it wasn't instant, like it took them a decade or more after that to even make that connection, but it was still a connection that could be made because of that description. So yeah, not looking good for Rex Heuermann, I would say, based on all of this. There was also a lot of DNA evidence in this case that tied Rex to the murders. So far we just talked about like the phone data, which obviously is compelling in and of itself, but DNA is really where you get the smoking gun evidence that can really be, without a reasonable doubt sort of thing. So, and there definitely is enough compelling DNA evidence in this case to lead to the conclusion that Rex is at the very, very least a very likely suspect in this case. So some of the DNA found is as follows. So like Katie said before, investigators found a belt at the scene at the dumping ground that was used to tie Maureen Brainerd Barnes. And on this belt was DNA that belonged to Rex's wife, Asa Ellerup. This is only one of 3 leather belts that was used to tie Maureen's body, with one being used to tie her ankles together. And even though it was Rex's wife's DNA, I mentioned earlier that the police were able to determine that she was out of state at the time the murders occurred, and therefore she's not seen as a suspect. But the DNA being hers can be explained by the fact that it was probably her belt, and it was from the home that she shared with Rex, and therefore it's not a shock that it would have some of her DNA on it. But the fact that it had her DNA and the cell phone activity correlates to the times and places of the disappearances and murders is highly compelling evidence tying Rex to all 4 murders. So back in 2010, when the bodies were first discovered, a hair was found on the belt buckle, but at the time it was unsuitable for DNA profiling, and upon being sent to a forensic lab for further investigation, it eventually came back with a match for a Caucasian female that was linked to a very specific genotype or DNA type, and it was determined not to be the victim's hair. So using this information and comparing it to the DNA samples obtained from trash receptacles that Rex had used to discard of some trash, the DNA was a match, and it was determined to be very likely belonging to Rex's wife. So CNN reports that the DNA is, quote, 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from a person genetically identical to Asa Ellerup's SNP genotype file than from an unrelated individual, end quote. So basically saying that, like, it's very, very likely and almost impossible that it isn't the DNA of Asa Ellerup. So at the time of the recovery, the technology to identify the DNA of the hair was not available, but because of the length of time this case took to be solved, new technology was then available that was able to detect that DNA profile linking the hair to Asa Ellerup and therefore to Rex. There were also hairs found on the bodies of Amber Costello and Megan Waterman that, when tested, were, quote, substantially more likely to have come from a person with genetically identical DNA profiles to that of Heuermann's wife and daughter, according to the indictment. There was also a male hair found near Megan Waterman's body that the police had on file from when the evidence was initially gathered back in 2010 or 2011, and they were able to connect that hair to Rex after they collected parts of Rex's DNA on pizza leftovers that he threw away in a garbage can on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. So the police, obviously, by this point, this is January 2023, when they collect these pizza leftovers from the garbage can, they obviously had Rex under surveillance at that time and were able to collect his DNA sample after observing him discarding the pizza and produce a match on that DNA on the pizza to the male hair that was found near Megan's body. So the court documents state that it is believed the DNA of Rex's wife Asa was transferred from either Rex's clothes or from other objects inside Rex's home to the belt, tape, and burlap sacks the DNA and the hairs were found on. So because these items were from the home, like you probably got the burlap sack from his house, the tape, the belts, it's obviously going to have his wife lived with him at the time. They lived in the same house. Her DNA is going to be all over the house. So whether her DNA was on his clothes or whether they were on those objects like the tape and the sack, like, it's going to be easy to transfer her DNA. So it's just interesting that, like, a lot of the DNA they found was hers, but he's linked to her because they lived together and all of that stuff, right? So that was, even though a lot of it wasn't his DNA specifically, but enough to really kind of nail him down because of all the other evidence they have. And to sum up, I guess, the cell phone data was enough evidence to consider Rex a person of interest in the investigation in early 2022, but cell phone location evidence was not a smoking gun. Like, there could be lots of people who live in Massapequa Park, who commute to Midtown Manhattan for work, and therefore they're in these 2 locations a lot. So it's not like these are places with tiny populations. There's millions of people who live in these cities. So just because you say this phone was used and traced to Massapequa Park and also Manhattan, like, lots of people could be in those 2 locations often. But when you tie the cell phone evidence in addition to these DNA samples that can now be linked to him, it was just too much for the police to ignore, and they now had their smoking gun evidence, which led to his arrest in July of 2023. So that's kind of like a summary of the DNA evidence. I'm sure there's probably others that I didn't mention, but kind of gives you an idea of the amount of DNA evidence that was at the crime scene and all of that stuff. And police were kind of doing their covert operations where they're like, have this person under surveillance, and they just were able to get him discarding of that pizza. And they also, I think, were following his adult daughter at the time, who was like drinking out of a can, and they were also able to gather her DNA from the can, which also tied it to, it was her DNA, I guess. I don't know how that happened, but there was a lot of kind of things happening at the same time that all led back to Rex, like whether it's his daughter or whether it's his ex-wife or himself, like lots of pieces here that are all linking back to him. Like the common denominator in all of these things is him. So it's very clear. So do you guys have any thoughts before I kind of say the last bit about this? But do you have any thoughts about the DNA or any questions? Or
It's crazy how, like, he just took a bite of that pizza and wasn't even thinking twice about it and just threw it out, and they happened to get his DNA off that. Like, that one quick not thinking moment is what kind of got him arrested, plus all the other information. But I also find it really odd, and maybe it's not odd at all, but like how they can connect. They had all his daughter's and his wife's DNA on everything, but they were able to connect them to him. But there was like, they didn't find any of his DNA except for that hair.
and kind of like come to the logical conclusion of like, well, you know, we know she was out of the state or out of the country when these murders occurred, so we know it wasn't her, but her DNA is still there on all these items, so it has to come from someone who like lives with her or would have her DNA on them. So that's how they're able to trace it. And then the same with the daughter, like they know that she was kind of away and out of town at all those times, but they were able to get a piece of her DNA from like a can or something and trace it. So yeah, interesting that like there was very little of his DNA other than like the hair, but they were still able to like trace it to him through these other people whose DNA was there but weren't guilty of the crime. So
it's interesting that he was like so careful with the cell phones and had multiple cell phones and fake emails, but picks up a roll of tape that was lying around his house that had his wife's like hair stuck in it. You think he would have something that couldn't be traced back to him, like buying a new roll of duct tape or something, you know, and like the belt that was left there.
Yeah. I don't know if the hair was on the duct tape, but maybe her DNA. Like they said, like I guess if her DNA was on his clothes and then.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess. But the hair was stuck to the tape though.
Oh, there was.
Right?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, in some reports that I said that the tape that they found, there was hair stuck to it. So I guess whether it was stuck to it when he actually used it or it got on there because there was hair on him, I guess. But
I mean, he was bound to slip up eventually. Like, I feel like you can only keep up that for so long. And he was still being very vigilant with looking up the status of the investigation. But I guess he didn't think enough to at the time to not just use items that were in his house, I guess. But yeah.
I guess, yeah. And if he was the one that had killed all the previous 6, like we had said before, maybe he just got kind of cocky that he hadn't gotten caught. So he was just being a little bit more lazy. Because I guess the other 6, it's harder. There's not as much evidence on them, DNA evidence for sure. So they're thinking he was super careful. And then as he wasn't getting caught, that's when he kind of, you know, like stopped dismembering them because it was just easier to throw out entire body and stuff like that. So maybe he was just getting careless. But I guess that's kind of my question to you guys would be, do you think that he killed all 10 of them, or was he just the one that killed the Gilgo 4 and somebody else killed the other ones?
I think it's very likely he killed them all, I would say. Like, what are the chances that 2 serial killers are going to pick the same exact dumping ground? I mean, there's lots of places in Long Island or in New York, maybe. I don't know. I just feel like it's very weird that there would be 2 people leaving that many bodies, 2 or more people. I feel like it makes more sense to it to be one.
Yeah, like I'm kind of on the fence. Like I'm leaning towards more that like he did kill all 10, but also like there's different like the ways that the bodies were killed, right? Like Katie was saying, like the previous ones were like dismembered and these ones were full body, so 2 different strategies. So like usually with serial killers they do one thing, but we also learned that serial killers do change their MO sometimes too, so I'm on the fence, but I am leaning more towards he did kill all 10.
Yeah, and they kind of, serial killers, we know that they evolve too sometimes, right? As they kind of get into it, like it's gross to talk about, but what they like to do. And so maybe as him like setting them all up, like the collector kind of thing. I don't know, but also for me, it seems like dismembering is such a crazy thing to do to somebody that you'd think that you wouldn't just do that as your first time to make it easier to dispose of. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you would.
It's weird that you would like start with that and then like usually I feel like you would like develop into that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like for your very first time.
Yeah, like I feel like you
Yeah.
would start out not doing that and then maybe do it
Mhm.
later.
Yeah.
Like it's weird you would do it once and then never again. But I also think like I'm leaning more towards the fact that like he probably killed way more than 10 too. Because like I also read an article too that's saying like I guess they interviewed, I think it was Rolling Stone, they interviewed someone who had been following this case or something, and they were like, these Gilgo murders were back in 2007 to 2010, and he wasn't arrested until 2023. So like, it's very unlikely that he would kill that many people, and if he killed the other people before, like, that he would have stopped in 2010. Like, I highly doubt 2010 was the last murder he did, and then he went 13 years without doing any more. Like, I feel like it was escalating, and it's not going to take that much time. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like if he had that much of like a sickness where he couldn't help himself, what's changed in that 13 years that made him not kill anyone after that? Like, I think it's very likely there's more victims after those ones.
Yeah. I think the only thing that changed was the dumping ground, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, there's another dumping ground somewhere that they're going to uncover.
Yeah, like I'm thinking, like with this case, like I always go back to
Shannan Gilbert.
I go back to her because if it wasn't for her, unfortunately, they probably wouldn't have found the rest of the bodies and we wouldn't be talking about him getting arrested today.
Yeah. It's just a coincidence.
It's just coincidence, and like her story, like we don't know if he killed her, right? Like a lot of us are leaning towards maybe not, maybe it's just a coincidence that she died where she died, but there also has to be like justice for her family too, because if it wasn't for her, then none of these other victims' families would have justice for their loved ones.
Yeah. It's very likely that her case will go unsolved for a long time coming as well. Like, if she's not connected to these murders, it's still a mystery who killed her. And something that came up for me too, when I was like reading the court documents about how he had searched for child pornography and all that, like I just went back to like that toddler that they found. I don't even want to like think about that, but was that something that if he did kill the toddler, like if he was into that, like it's so gross to even think about. But like I was thinking like, oh God, does that mean that maybe he was responsible for killing the toddler and Peaches, who's her mother? So it's just, I don't know, like a lot of questions still, but all we know for sure is like, well, I guess we don't know for sure. He's still pleading not guilty and he hasn't been sentenced, but convicted. But I feel like it's like a strong possibility, I feel like, that he did kill all those people. And there's just another dumping ground ready to be discovered. So it's very likely that you think he just changed dumping grounds, like he just decided to
Especially after they found it, he definitely switched, right? He wasn't going to go back to that dumping ground. So I feel like after they found the bodies, that's when he switched.
Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. So then every other body after that, if there is others, is just in another dumping ground ready to be recovered. Or maybe he did multiple dumping grounds, like he just dumped each body in a different place.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I wonder, because he's already denying killing those four. I wonder if he'll eventually just confess, and if he'll confess and admit to more. Or if he's only going to confess to the ones that they know for sure, or if he's going to confess at all. Like, I'm just interested to see where this case goes for sure. And I think his trial starts like next week, like April 17th is what I saw. So we'll definitely have to have an update after we know more.
Oh yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, because we're recording this April 11th, so
yeah, like a week from when we're recording. Yeah,
so that'll be interesting to see the result. I mean, the evidence is very compelling. I mean, when you read, we're gonna put a link to the full court documents just from like the first 3 initial charges, but you can't really read that evidence and like not be compelled. I mean, like it all ties back to him, like I explained. So it's just crazy. And like, just think of like how like depraved and like monstrous this one guy was. If he did kill those 10 plus who knows how many more. Like the first one was killed in 97, so that's, that was 26 years between that murder and when he was arrested. So who knows?
Yeah, I think a place where they should start to figure out is like find out other times when his wife was away for a couple days at a time at least, and see if anything matches up in the area for like missing or murdered sex workers. You might find a connection really quickly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That was my first thought too. I was like, look at her travel history. Like, interview her, like get a list of every time she left the city and match that with missing persons cases from those dates. Because that would be very compelling.
Yeah, can you imagine if that's how they found out like more? They just matched all that up and were able to connect it. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, because like, it's like a pattern, right? So obviously once you have established that he has that pattern, like it's not like he's probably going to continue to do that when his wife is away, right? Obviously it's clear from those 3 or 4 that he did that.
Yeah, makes sense.
So basically this case is just still ongoing. Still lots of mysteries. Like, who knows what will come up? Like you said, Katie, if he will confess to all the killings, if there'll be another dumping ground. I mean, if he gets convicted of these 4, like, he should just come clean and tell us all, because he's not getting out of jail anyway. Probably won't. But just get justice for all the victims. Like, even like Peaches, like I said, 26 years since she was killed, or 27 years since she was killed. She's never even been identified. Like, she's just known as Peaches. And then her child, and also I'm curious too, though, because there's still that, out of the 10 bodies that they found, there's still that Asian male that was found that doesn't match the profile. He wasn't killing men, but
he was wearing women's clothing though, so maybe he was, transgender, or he was picked up. The killer thought that he was female at the beginning or something, and just decided to kill him anyway, even though he didn't match the previous victims. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. That Asian male has never been identified either, so we still don't have a name for him. So yeah, I think it's like Peaches, her child, and then the Asian male that are still waiting to be identified. I think the other 7 have been identified officially.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, God, yeah, I'm thinking like, yeah, someone has to get her passport history, like pull that up, find out when she was out of town from whatever year to whatever year, and figure that out. That'd be a good place to start. And who knows how many victims there actually are once it all comes out. So it's just crazy to think, but.
We'd have to talk to his first wife too, because like he could have been killing when he was with his first wife too. So you have to like get her background too, right? Like do you know what I mean? Like, because when did he get married the second time? 1996?
Yeah.
And that's when the killings started?
We don't know. We don't know how far back it could actually go.
Maybe they should get his first wife, her background, and like where they lived and stuff like that. And then maybe you could find more, or maybe if there is more.
Yeah. Who knows? It could be in the hundreds. I feel like, because like I said before, it's very unlikely that he just stopped killing after 2010. Like, there has to be more, I feel. Especially because he was getting away with it for so long and probably got arrogant and thinking the police would never catch him, because they never had up until then. But he was still very invested of the progress of the investigations, like still looking up to see what the updates were and all of that stuff. So just a crazy case. And like I said, it's still ongoing. The trial is still, by the time this episode comes out, the trial has been going on. So we'll update you as we go along here, because we're going to be waiting to see what results from it. Like, Rex Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all charges in relation to the Gilgo 4. He is currently being held without bail, awaiting trial. So the daughter of the first victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, her daughter was just 7 at the time of her disappearance or her murder. And so she's actually, that was 17 years ago. So she's now 24 or in her early 20s. And so she said in a statement following Rex's charges for the murder, quote, "While the loss of my mom has been extremely painful for me, the indictment by the grand jury has brought hope for justice for my mom and my family," end quote. So the path to justice has begun, I guess. So we'll see where it takes us and where this all ends up. So I think that does it for our coverage of this case. It was a hefty one to kind of finish up the season on, but we are very happy that you have listened along, or listened to all the episodes. If you have, we thank you for listening. And if you, we're going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus because we're at the end of this season, but you can expect maybe a little like retrospective thing about 100 episodes. Who knows? Hint, hint. We'll see. Yeah, we're at the end of the season and we're going to be away for a little bit, but we will be back with more cases and more true crime coverage. You can find us on all the social medias. We're at Crime Family Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, Crime Family Pod 1 on Twitter or X. If you want to be a patron of the show, you can find the link for that, get extra content and bonus episodes potentially. And also you can get some merch from the show. The link to that is in the show notes. And our email is crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com if you want to send us a case suggestion or your feedback. And you can send us give us a review and a rating on your favorite podcast app. We love to interact with you and engage. We're also on YouTube, so you can subscribe to us on Crime Family Podcast and leave your comments there to interact with us. Even though we're on hiatus, we still want to interact with you, and we'll take your questions and your comments and as they come along. Also, our website is crimefamilypodcast.ca, so you can check us out on our website as well. So lots of ways to interact with us and engage. So thank you so much. It's been a great season. And until next season, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.